with that, now calling the meeting to order. Stephanie, can we please get roll call?
Commissioner Ali,
Present.
Commissioner Daniel,
Present.
Commissioner Dillard,
Present.
Commissioner Gathua,
Present.
Commissioner Harris is absent this evening. Commissioner Johnson is absent this evening. Commissioner Rivera,
Present.
Commissioner Nobis,
Present.
and Commissioner Traore.
Present.
Thank you.
So next we do have the reading of the land acknowledgement.
I can read it. We meet today in the community of Iowa City, which now occupies the homelands of the Native American nations to whom we owe our commitment and dedications. The area of Iowa City was within the homelands of the Iowa, Meskwaki, and Sauk. And because history is complex and time goes far back beyond memory, we also acknowledge the ancient connections of many other Indigenous peoples here. The history of broken treaties and forced removal that dispossessed Indigenous peoples of their homelands was and is an act of colonization and genocide that we cannot erase. We implore the Iowa City community to commit to understanding and addressing these injustices as we work toward equity, restoration, and reparations.
Thank you. So we do have the discussion item on here as well with that. So just wanted to check if anyone did have something to say on this. I just have one clarifying item. Stephanie, if I remember correctly, City of Iowa City Council does vote on whether to approve the recommendation for the land council for the land acknowledgement next week.
So your final minutes are part of the consent calendar for the city council meeting of Tuesday, September 7th. More likely than not, if there is a discussion that council has, it would probably be set up for a future work session for them to have a discussion on whether or not they're going to accept and move forward on the recommendation.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions on that aspect? Okay. So with that, we now move on to agenda item number 4, which is the presentation and Q&A with Kearns and West for TRC facilitator. Just a reminder, there will be no public comment during this agenda item. The public will be allowed to provide comments during the next agenda item.
Yeah, I am Teresa Vanatter. I'm the procurement coordinator for the city of Iowa City. Tonight, Kearns and West is going to be presenting their proposal. We're going to give them about 20 or 30 minutes to do a proposal, and then we're going to open it up for about 30 minutes for questions. So if you guys want to start off with introductions, so you can just your names, and then we'll turn it over to Kearns and West.
Mohammed Traore.
Amel Ali. Chastity Dillard.
Kevo Rivera.
Wangui Gadua.
Daphne Daniel. Takawa Nobis.
Cliff Johnson.
Now we can turn it over to Kearns and West.
Good evening, everyone. Mr. Chair and members of the Commission, it's a great privilege to be before you tonight. My name is Larry Schooler. I'm a director and senior facilitator at Kearns and West, and I'll be kicking off our presentation this evening, and I'm joined by 3 other members of our team who I'll introduce in a moment. I don't have screen sharing rights at the moment, so I'm happy to talk without a PowerPoint deck, or if it's possible for me to be granted that, I can walk through a short.
Here, sure.
Can we turn the volume up a little, please?
It's the first time in my entire career I've been told I'm too quiet. It looks like I've got the screen share. Thank you very much. So if you'll just give me a moment, I'm gonna get to the right area. Do you all see a slide up on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Well, as I mentioned, we as a collective and as individuals are deeply honored by the opportunity to be considered for the role of facilitating this critically important body. I'll tell you a little bit about myself last. I want to introduce Kyle Vint. Kyle is an Iowan. He has spent a good chunk of his life in eastern Iowa and also a portion of it in Iowa City as a student and as a resident. Sarah Omar is one of our senior associates. She has a graduate degree in conflict resolution from George Mason University and leads up our equitable and inclusive engagement practice at Kearns and West. She's also my co-facilitator for the Community Task Force on Policing in Elgin, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. And I know you all know Eduardo Gonzalez, one of the leading worldwide thinkers on the topic of truth and reconciliation, a veteran consultant and staff person to many TRCs, including his native Peruvian TRC, the TRC in Greensboro, North Carolina, and elsewhere. We're honored that he is a strategic advisor to our team. You'll also note two other strategic advisors who aren't able to join us tonight. Dante James is a thought leader in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion. He's worked for city government in Portland, Oregon, Denver, and elsewhere, and he and I co-facilitated the Racial Equity and Policing Commission of Salt Lake City that just completed its phase 1 report. Shafin Roberts of Pepperdine University is also an advisor. He worked with us in Salt Lake City, but he also leads the mediation program for the Los Angeles Police Department in its interactions with the community and has lectured nationally on the topic of community police relations. So we believe that our team is well positioned, not simply based on our experience as facilitators, but also as our subject matter expertise, particular to TRCs. And just to introduce myself briefly, in addition to supporting and facilitating the commissions I alluded to in Salt Lake City and Elgin, I'm the author of a book on truth and reconciliation commissions due out shortly from Lexington. It was the topic of my dissertation. I reported on the Greensboro TRC for National Public Radio and Voice of America. And both Eduardo and I are part of a national group that is considering a national TRC that we can discuss later on. So we all bring both a passion for this work, some subject matter expertise, and we think some of the skills that would be useful to you all as this work continues. Sarah's going to tell you a little bit more about Kearns and West. Sarah?
Thank you, Larry. I just wanted to take a few moments to talk about who we are as a firm. So Kearns and West is a small woman-owned business that specializes in a range of services from collaborative and community engagement to process design and conflict resolution services. We have a strong, equitable, inclusive, and digital engagement practice. In fact, the practice of equity and inclusion is fundamental to the work we do. We believe that equitable inclusive engagement is not only about ensuring diverse perspectives are at the table, but that deliberative actions and targeted strategies are taken to make sure that they are part of the decision-making process. And for our digital engagement practice, it's really to make sure that we seek different additional avenues to reach members of the community, doing so in ways to lower burden and help with the decision-making process. Larry mentioned a few of the different projects that we are involved in, but others are the City of Austin's equity-based historic preservation, which is ensuring the stories of all of Austin is being heard. We are also involved in the task force on policing in Vancouver. And then just to name a few, and we're happy to discuss them in further detail.
Thanks, Sarah. We assembled this team in large part to try to make sure that we had members of our team that can meet all of the different needs that this TRC has outlined in the request for proposal. So we are all trained mediators, I should say. Those of us directly at Kearns and West have received that training. I have a doctorate in conflict resolution, and we have all chosen to focus our careers in the public sector. You may think of mediation as primarily for business disputes, family, divorce, force, et cetera. We really have staked our careers on public policy mediation and consensus building and working with the kinds of groups like the TRC. As I mentioned before, we've been working actively throughout the course of the last 2 years with groups that have very similar goals and objectives. No two groups are the same. No two scopes are the same. No two communities are the same. But we believe that we can apply some of our lessons learned and best practices from those other commissions and task forces to assist Iowa City. We also have a deep background in community engagement, and I'm sure many people saw Chairman Traore's op-ed in the Press Citizen today, where he talked about a call to action for community members to influence the work of the TRC and to be heard. I'm the former president of the International Association for Public Participation, and I'm a fellow at the National Civic League. And that's really where I sort of cut my teeth in this work, is trying to ensure that all of those affected by decisions would have the chance to affect those decisions. So the logos that you see on this slide reference a couple of specific tools that I've worked to develop that have been used in places as big as New York City and as small as probably Fort Worth, Texas, but all with an aim towards getting more of the voices into the conversation than we normally hear. So the Conversation Corps is a volunteer training program to train community members as facilitators to fan out across broader swaths of the community to receive more meaningful input. And A View from You is a televised community conversation that is simulcast in multiple languages and provides people with telephonic, text message, and social media-based options to contribute their views. And we average anywhere from 1 to 5,000 people per broadcast, so we get a much broader range of views. I also mentioned the equitable and inclusive engagement piece, and I think it's important to note this is not something that just recently arrived on the scene for Kearns and West. This has been something that our firm has worked on for quite some time. We have a practice statement associated with our EIE practice, and it's also, I think, embedded into just about every project we have. So it's not meant to be this, side interest, but rather a way to meaningfully integrate that into all of the work that we do. And as I mentioned before, we are doing quite a bit of work on policing. I have some experience prior to this last couple of years with the Austin Police Department, as well as the experience that I mentioned with Salt Lake City and Elgin. And I know that other members of our team have had related experience as well. So that's a little bit more about our team. I'll turn things over to Kyle.
Thanks, Larry. I'd like to begin by just echoing Larry's sentiment about how excited we are to be here discussing this proposal and the opportunity for our team to support this work. The team that we have proposed is invested in seeing this process move forward toward success. And I plan to speak about a few of the reasons why that's the case. Our team has put in decades of personal, professional, and scholarly time into the growth and evolution of the field of truth and reconciliation in ways that make us invested in seeing those truth and reconciliation processes prosper. Beyond the scholarship and the projects that you're aware of from Larry and Eduardo, they have both been working in a personal capacity to try and launch national TRCs. Larry is, as he mentioned, publishing a book about the importance and process design behind TRCs. So the group of individuals that we've assembled for this team are all eager to find projects like this one where we can take our professional experience and see it directly overlap with the type of work and effort that's needed on the particular project. Stepping back just a little bit, Kearns and West was one of the first firms in the field of stakeholder engagement and conflict resolution to formally adopt policies and principles of neutrality. And I just want to underscore that we believe deeply in maintaining fidelity to those principles when involving ourselves in processes like truth and reconciliation commissions. We really want to work on projects where we can elicit fact, where we can protect and empower storytellers, and we can assist in turning those shared perspectives into policies that are informed by the community. And as Sarah and Larry both mentioned, we're all part of Kearns and West's equitable and inclusive engagement practice, where we take that desire and work professionally to develop meaningful processes to ensure that the underrepresented and the vulnerable are able to participate in public decision-making efforts. Just on a personal note, and Larry already mentioned this in passing, but I have a somewhat different interest than the rest of the team in seeing this work succeed. I'm a native Cedar Rapidian, and I spent over a decade of my life, as recently as 2018, living in Iowa City while working on my undergraduate and graduate education. I coached the University of Iowa debate team for a number of years. I've worked with countless students from West and City High. Iowa City is a community that I love dearly, and I jumped at the opportunity to work with Sarah and Larry and the rest of the team to propose our support in helping move forward these really critical conversations.
Thank you very much, Kyle. I want to just spend a couple more minutes explaining how we envision the role that we would play on your behalf. I think it's really important that you all understand that we are here to serve you, and we are here to help you more easily achieve the things that are most important to you. You probably know the word facilitation itself comes from a Latin root for easy, and we see our role as to make it easier for you all to be able to define and carry out the work that needs to be done. We bring process and subject matter expertise and can help with, designing events, designing meeting agendas, guiding discussion in such a way that it helps the commission achieve consensus wherever possible, or at least achieve resolution to a set of conflicting perspectives. We have, as we've mentioned, a lot of experience as third-party neutrals there to assist people of a variety of different perspectives with finding common ground, with understanding each other's points of view, and with arriving at decisions that the entire group feels that they can support. We also believe that we have a critical role to play in identifying and elevating voices outside of the commission, again, based on the best practices and experience we've had all across the country. Our practice, as you saw on the map, goes all the way from Vancouver, Washington to Miami Beach, Florida, and all points in between. And so we've absorbed a lot as it relates to what works and what doesn't in engagement. We know that each community is different and distinct, so we will most assuredly be customizing any recommendation for an approach to the needs of the community as you all help us to identify them and as our team identifies. But we believe we have the experience to bring some cutting edge tools to bear to assist you with the critical community engagement part of this work. Also, just want to briefly touch upon a proposed timeline. This is, of course, as you all know, a very ambitious undertaking. Any TRC is. Most of the TRCs with which I'm familiar, there have been, now I think almost 4 dozen or more, depending on how you define TRC. But nearly all of them have taken, at minimum, 2 years from swearing in to final report. That's the Greensboro timeline. Many take more years than that for a variety of reasons. And so this timeline is assuredly somewhat aggressive. What we're trying to do is we're trying to sketch out a plan that would meet all of the needs outlined in the RFP, but at the same time allow the TRC to be deliberate, to hear the voices that need to be heard, to allow anyone who feels they have a stake in this work to be part of it, and to give you all enough time to deliberate before you issue final recommendations. So you'll notice that there is some overlap, for example, between the first stage where we get a deeper understanding of this work, of this community, of this TRC's purpose, and our work on designing a process in tandem with the TRC. And that's because we believe that we can start doing some design work behind the scenes as we're gathering info, but of course would need to bring those proposed designs back to you all to make sure that we're on the right track or to get any necessary course corrections. Then you'll notice that the fact-finding and truth-telling public process would get underway as that design work is happening, and that's simply out of recognition that oftentimes the best laid plans of mice and men go awry. So you could have a situation where we've agreed on a design as a team and as a TRC, and then we deploy that in the field and we find there are some key missing pieces, missing links. And so we would want to make some adjustments to the design as we go along based on the results. And then we believe that the TRC itself should continue meeting on an ongoing basis to assess what it is that they're hearing, what they yet need to hear, what research they need to be conducting independently of the community input and public process. And then, of course, the report compilation would be something that we would expect would happen sort of in coordination with the TRC, but not in such a way that all commissioners had to wordsmith and draft, each word. Perhaps there would be subcommittees assigned to write different portions, or perhaps members of our team would help with initial drafts and then bring it back. But we believe that that extended process would be done both during meetings and in parallel to those meetings. And then project administration is just a recognition that we have tasks that we would want to make sure we take care of as a consultant to make sure that the project remains on task. And that's something, of course, that we would pursue throughout the course of the project. So we know that there's probably a lot more that you're interested in knowing, but we wanted to give you that overview. And in closing, just express to you how deeply passionate we are about the work that you're doing. This is no ordinary project. This is no ordinary proposal. This is no ordinary team for our firm. And this is no ordinary time in American history. And we are, as I've said, feeling privileged to be in a position to potentially assist you all with it, and would welcome any questions and conversation. Thank you very much for the time.
Would any of you prefer to begin? Okay, my initial question is, with this 12-month proposed timeline, so just do want to make it clear that regardless of our recommendation, the City Council does also have to approve of the RFP. And so when it comes to that, how soon do you see yourselves being able to begin afterwards?
We are prepared to begin as soon as council approves us to begin and a contract is in place, Chairman. We are ready. We've allotted the time necessary to do so. So, I mean, we would anticipate being able to start potentially within this same month if that was called for, if not next month.
And then just wanted to clarify what was meant by manage the project budget, schedule, and deliverables, and specifically what I mean by that is, in terms of manage it, are we saying that in a sense of it is drafted by yourselves and for our review and then gets sent that way, or is it drafted by yourselves, reviewed by us, but then the final say in how it looks, are you expecting to have control on that?
No, sir, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think I could have phrased that a little bit more artfully. What I meant there was simply that you all will be granting us a budget to perform the services that you've asked us to. And so we have responsibility for monitoring the rate at which we are spending time on this project and reporting to you accordingly on a regular basis. We also may be asking you to approve certain direct costs for various forms of technology or other engagement tools that we think would aid and abet the work of the TRC. So that would be something that we would want to approve. But it really just speaks to overall project management of the work that we would be performing to the TRC. There's no desire or benefit to our controlling any of your budget external to our to the fee that we would be receiving.
And then so that initial clarifying question earlier about the managing the project budget, schedule, and deliverables, just another one stemming from that is the amount of control assumed on the final recommendations. So again, just very wary of how much input the community does get to have. So would that be something as well that would be in tandem with the community in terms of really looking for public engagement? Would the final recommendations be looked at in a survey format to the community to see what they would like to have weighed, or more so of compiling what has been done over the entirety of the commission and just formulating it that way?
Well, I appreciate the question, and let me just be very clear in saying that these recommendations belong to the TRC and the community of Iowa City. They are not Kearns and West's. They're none of ours individually. We see ourselves as capturing the sentiments that you all produce, not simply as stenographers. Obviously we're meant to help you all have a productive conversation, but these recommendations belong to you and to you alone. And as it relates to your question, I think that there are a number of different tools, including a survey, that we could use to gauge community support or misgivings about any considered recommendations. We certainly would flesh out a full-fledged inclusive engagement strategy that would allow anyone with an interest to give you that kind of feedback. But it would be our highest priority to make sure that only when the TRC felt the community had been meaningfully engaged would you finalize your recommendations, and they would have your names on it and probably not ours.
And then this next question would be individually for each of you to answer.
Okay.
So when it comes to how much say you all expect to have amongst yourselves, and also how much you are all collaborating, is it truly done in such a way that you all have an equal say, or is there a main point person that has final ruling?
It's an interesting question. I'm not sure we've been asked that before. Kyle, you want to go first, and then Sarah, and then I'll jump in, and maybe Eduardo can add in.
Yeah, I can take a first cut at that, Larry. I think philosophically speaking, we are a collaboration firm, and we approach all of the projects through collaboration. So, in all of this, we're starting off with a project management plan and approach plan that says how we as individuals within our K&W team and the wider team would be approaching this. We all have our areas of expertise. So, my background is in digital communication and virtual engagement. If there are a particular topic like how to hold a virtual webinar, virtual workshop, I think I would probably lead that discussion, but open that up for perspective and feedback from all of the other people on our team, the commission, and members of the public. At the end of the day, I view Larry as the project manager and the project principal in charge on this. And if there were a question about how we should move forward, I would defer to him on the best method for making that decision. But we all make decisions through a consensus on the team, given where we are in our professional lives and the type of work that we do as a firm.
And I completely agree with Kyle. And I just wanted to add, we've all worked together before, and we know where our strong suits are. So I'm pretty process oriented, and will help probably with developing the work plan with internally as a Kearns and West team, but also with the TRC. So that's where I know my strong suit is. And again, our process is having standing internal calls to discuss any action items that we have as a group, and make sure that there's roles for each person.
Mr. Chairman, one thing I didn't mention is that I teach at the University of Texas, and one of the classes I teach is in facilitative leadership. And so if I did not lead in that fashion, then I would not have a job there, that's for sure. But I mean, in all seriousness, that's a core value for me, to, as they say, either lead from behind or, lead only in conjunction with the team. And never would that be more true in this case. And I do want to allow Eduardo to share if he would like as well. But as you know, this team brings an enormous amount of expertise and lived experience, and I would be a fool to make any decision on our behalf in a vacuum without, huge amounts of input. Eduardo, would you like to add anything?
Yes, Larry, very briefly, thank you all for the participation and the opportunity to be in this meeting. As you may remember, when the TRC was created, I wrote to the members of the TRC to offer any kind of help that would be needed. I also wrote to the City Council in March when discussion about the future of the TRC was taking place. And I'm very happy that the Commission is overcoming the difficulties of the beginning phases. And I do think that it will be very interesting for me as an advisor, an ad honorem advisor, to support this excellent team. I do think that one of my tasks advising this team is precisely to understand the dynamics of work that the team has. I do think that, of course, whenever you have a small team of people, things tend to be perhaps easier. And obviously there are lines of reporting, and as Kyle said, Larry is going to be the responsible person for this. But I do think that it's always interesting and to have complementary roles in a team. My role is going to be perhaps the easiest one as an advisor, but it is this talented group of people that is going to be taking care of the heavy lifting. And I do think that different views, different life perspectives are definitely very useful for a team.
The next question would be, when it comes to the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions and the TRC-like organizations that you have worked with in the past, how do you typically hear of these opportunities? Is it by solicitation from the governments themselves, from the community themselves, or from the actual TRC bodies?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the Salt Lake City Racial Equity and Policing Commission did release an RFP in the same fashion that you all did. They are probably a little bit more attached to municipal government, and so it did come from Salt Lake City Corporation, as I recall, and we submitted the winning proposal. The same holds for the city of Elgin, where they created the Community Task Force on Policing and then did a municipal solicitation to which we responded. Now, Eduardo's body of work is different, I would say, in the sense that he, of course, has been involved in countless efforts like this where it hasn't been done via formal solicitation. It's been done based on perhaps word of mouth or other ways in which people learn of what Eduardo has to offer. So he certainly can add on. But in response to your question, the bodies themselves, in tandem with their sponsoring entities, appear to have issued solicitations to which we've responded.
And Cliff, I do want to give you the opportunity to ask your question.
Good evening. Just would like to say thank you for your time tonight, and just in general for trying to help us out in this situation. I have a few questions. Answer them if you could answer them. Whomever, it doesn't matter. What would you consider a successful TRC, and what would you consider a failed TRC?
Well, thanks for the question, Commissioner. I think that a successful TRC is one in which the commissioners feel that they have fulfilled their mandate, that they have gotten something out of it individually, but also that they feel as if they have positioned the city and the city council to help bring about very meaningful and needed change in the Iowa City community. I also consider it successful if the community itself feels that they have been heard, both in terms of raw numbers of participation and demographic breakdown of participants, but also in the sense that the recommendations that come out of the TRC that are hopefully blessed by the council reflect their input. So when I did my dissertation, that was the very topic that I researched. I studied all of the testimony given to the Greensboro, Maine, and Canadian TRCs, and then I looked at their final reports and analyzed and evaluated how well they did at hearing what the public was telling them. And I believe that that's mission critical to the success of this endeavor. I hesitate to talk about what a failed TRC is. I mean, I suppose if the TRC just did not complete its work, that might be viewed as a failure. But quite honestly, I think that you all have achieved more success already than you may fully appreciate or realize. And so, I don't see any indication that this would be on any path other than a successful one. So I'm happy to defer to Eduardo, Sarah, and Kyle for any additional insight, but that would be my take.
I think the only thing that I'd add, Larry, I think you're right that success is defined in part by the outcomes associated with the process. But I also think that, independently, people feeling like they have a location that's safe to be able to come and tell their stories and tell their truth, find credibility in that platform is in and of itself a metric of success. And given that my focus is on that point of communication and interaction, I think it's really important that level of credibility gets established, and that's an important marker of success in this process.
And my point is very brief, but I just wanted that there's transparency and points where we engage with the public as we move forward with this process in different milestones.
Go ahead, Eduardo.
Sorry, I promise I'm a bit more compelling in person. But something I would like to add is, yes, it's always difficult to define what exactly success is. And certainly different groups are involved in the operation of a truth commission, and the entire city is going to be judging how the commission does its work. And there will be different opinions regarding whether the commission has been successful or not. But what I think is probably useful is to think of what are the factors that result in making success likely. What are the factors, what are the methodologies that will help achieve success, independently of course, the different subjective views about what success is. And I do think that there are a few factors that experience tells us are significant. One, to me, is that a successful commission is one that learns from their peers. And there have been so many truth commissions right now in the United States and abroad that I think getting in touch with members of former commissions is a good strategy to find out what are the landmines, what are the difficulties, what are the risks, the errors that they committed, and what are the good practices too. So learning from others, to me, is a factor of success. A second factor of success, I think, is to listen. Truth commissions should not be, in my view at least, a debating forum. That is, it's not a place where commissioners go to discuss among themselves. On the contrary, it's a place where commissioners go to listen to what the community wants to say and to be the best conveyors of what the community wants to say. So if a commission listens, people will eventually realize that the commission is doing that the commission is not taking the opportunity to organize meetings to talk, but that the commission is going to be there to listen. And at the end of their work, they are going to certainly make recommendations, make findings, but for most of the time that the commission is going to be working, it will be listening. And if the people see that the commission listens, that is, in my view, a factor of success. Another factor of success, I do think, is consultation. That is, truth commissions work with divisive issues, with controversial issues, things that not everybody in the community see in the same way, because we, in all our communities, we live in situations of trauma, of injustice, and obviously trauma and injustice generate hard feelings, and that is completely normal and understandable. So commissions will have to work with that subject matter, and the best way of doing that is by consulting, by asking what to do, where to go. The commission should not come with a preconceived idea of what exactly it wants to do. It needs to have flexibility. And finally, I do think that another factor of success is to have certain ground rules among commissioners of how are they going to work, how are they going to relate to each other, and how are they going to organize their meetings, their activities. And that is one of the main things that I expect this team to be doing, which is to facilitate meetings. I think you will see eventually that as time passes, probably the strictly facilitating function is going to get lower in terms of other functions that this team is going to assume, because you will be able to do that on your own. Some truth commissions need a lot of facilitation because sometimes there are intractable issues to discuss, but eventually those move away. A truth commission that is successful then, in my view, is one that over time builds consensus and understanding among its members. Successful truth commissions, in my experience, rarely vote or almost never vote, or they vote only to confirm a finding or to issue its report. But commissions that are functional rarely vote because they are able to work together and to build the credibility, the trust that is necessary to work in a functional way.
I appreciate that, those answers. I have another question as well. How much resistance have you dealt with and of what kind?
I'm thinking about the best way to answer that. I mean, I think that in Salt Lake City, we certainly had a couple of situations in which police officers who were monitoring the work of the Racial Equity and Policing Commission looked at that as something with deep skepticism and even concern or dismay. We perceive there to be a variety of different opinions in Elgin, Illinois around the formation of the Community Task Force on Policing there, and some concern about whose voices are at the table and whose voices are not. I think that there are always going to be folks who view something as monumental and as significant and as impactful as this with some mix of anxiety, concern, frustration, or vitriol, or deep opposition. And I'm not sure that's avoidable, nor maybe should it be. I think this is not about necessarily creating a safe space, but about creating a brave space for people to be in touch with their discomfort around issues of racial inequity and systemic and institutional racism. And so it's almost as if a lack of resistance might alarm me, if you understand my point, Commissioner. So I hope that answers your question. I'm thinking mostly about more recent projects in the way I'm answering. Oh, and Eduardo, I think, wanted to add something as well, if he could. I think you might be muted, sir.
Yes, sorry. Again, if I were to talk in percentages, I do think that in any given community, when a TRC is established, you're going to have a small number of people who are very actively expected to support the commission because they understand the mission, they want it to succeed because of its goals. And then there is probably another 10% of people who is ardently against it because they fear truth-telling, they fear the truth, they fear a change of the status quo. And that resistance is to be expected. But what I really worry about is that 80% of people who don't care at all and who appear to be indifferent or have learned because of life, because of situations, to put themselves in a careful, studied position of being bystanders. They are bystanders when there is injustice, and there are bystanders when there is an effort to tell the truth. And in reality, I do think that when you have people who are hostile to the process, the best way to deal with that is to making the effort to engage. And probably they are not going to engage with you, or probably they are going to misrepresent the process anyway. But it is very important to make sure that there is a constancy that you engaged and that you attempted this relation. But the big question to me has always been what to do with the indifferent or those who want to be indifferent. In my view, some people are indifferent because they just don't have the time, because they're busy, because they are living in conditions in which they cannot afford the luxury of thinking beyond the daily struggle. And then there are others who are very comfortable with things as they are. And so there needs to be a specific strategy of communication and outreach. And I think that a Truth Commission should be putting most of its effort, not just in thinking of those who attack the commission, because there are always going to be those, but thinking of how to engage those who are being indifferent, who are showing that that apparently issues of racial justice and racial inequity are not their problem.
And I think this goes without saying, but if I could just add, indifference is a form of resistance, in my view. I mean, it is not simply passive. It is essentially making the statement that something that is affecting a huge portion of my community is of no concern to me, or at least not enough concern that I would participate in some way. And I'm not trying to cast aspersions. I'm just simply trying to suggest that it is up to us and the TRC to make a compelling case like the one in the chairman's op-ed that indifference is not an option. You know, there was a famous rabbinic quote in my tradition: the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference.
I have a few questions for you guys, and for the sake of time, I'm just going to ask them all
Sure.
at once. This is Vice Chair Ali speaking. The first question is kind of more directed towards Kyle, because he is the self-proclaimed internet guy, online guy. But have you guys worked with entities like city council or, you know, where there are laws in regards to like public speaking when there's more than 5 people there, you know, recording like that. And then like all of the data that you collect and the testimonies, how does that work? Where is it going to be? What access will we have to it? What access will staff and city council have to it? And how that process looks like. So that's my first question. And then
Would you mind if well, I'm sorry, you wanted to ask both at the same time. Sorry, Vice Chair.
Well, and my second question is that, so looking through this and hearing your presentation, there's a lot of mentioning like of the importance of structuring things in such a way to get law enforcement buy-in. So we had a previous OIR report from June 3rd tear gassing, which pretty much said that the Iowa City Police Department is arguably overrepresented. How do you guys propose to get law enforcement buy-in without reinforcing the impression that police drive the process and its goals rather than the community? And how familiar are you guys with the reforms and plans that have been produced so far in our city specifically? And along with that policing question, have you guys done things with like, you know, education, healthcare, housing, sustainability? Just because a lot of the focus is on policing, which I think is really extremely important. That's where one of my passions is within the TRC. But I'd like to know kind of where else and what else you guys have done as well.
Vice Chair, let me just apologize up front if I omit anything as we try to respond. I may have to ask you to repeat. I apologize, but these are great questions. Kyle, if I could, I wanted to just start with responding to her question related to how testimony is kept and you know, accessed and so forth. And I speak about this both as a practitioner in terms of the work I've done, but also as a researcher, because I actually faced some of the very things that you were just asking about. You know, how do I get my hands on the testimony? The first point I would make is that any testimony that is given publicly, whether it be in a TRC meeting or in a, you know, public event, should remain public and everyone should be able to access it. You know, we would compile it in a fashion that folks who are interested in summary could perhaps read summary, but the input that people were willfully giving in public would be accessible to, you know, the entire public. And we recognize that not everyone has reliable internet access to go visit a web portal. And so we would endeavor to compile it in forms that didn't require someone to have internet access. But the one nuance to that is that you will face circumstances, I predict, and Eduardo could speak to this also, where people would like to give testimony privately, where people would like for their testimony to be only viewed by a TRC. Sometimes I've seen cases where someone gives testimony to the TRC and they would like it to be, you know, expunged once the TRC finishes its work. So it's useful, I think, to have a set of choices for the person who is giving their testimony as to how they themselves would like it to be disseminated. And that empowers them, in my view. That gives them a sense of ownership over their story that they may not have had before. So in sum, just to answer your original question, we would work to ensure that any member of the public, any city council member, any staff person, any TRC member could see any and all testimony given in a public forum by someone willing to do so publicly. And then if there were people willing to give their story only under certain conditions, we would just seek to manage that process effectively, honor those traditions, those preferences, I should say, and make it available as the person deems is appropriate. The other thing I'll say, just in response to your second question, is that you're right that we paid particular attention to policing work, but I'm coming into this with about 14 years of experience primarily in municipal government. And so, as you can imagine, everything came my way, from housing to education to parks and recreation to transportation, human rights, immigration, homelessness, you name it. And so, we tend to focus a little bit more of our backgrounds on where we think there's greater interest, but we'd be happy to furnish, more unabridged versions of our backgrounds with those additional projects. And I can go into more detail, but I would like to turn back to Kyle for the first part of the question.
Yeah, Larry, and I actually just want to pick up and add one layer on top of what you've shared about information that's made public and information that's not made public. And just note, an important conversation that needs to happen is between our project team, if we're selected, our project team, and the city attorney and the privacy information officers or staff at the city to determine if there are specific city regulations that guide how information with personal identifiers are stored in digital interfaces. We're experienced with document management for various clients. We've worked to strip personal information out of data prior to publication and gone through the review and redaction process. We're happy to deal with that. We've established systems and servers for maintaining records at certain record schedules. They have to be deleted after so many years or maintained for so many years per state or local laws. The specific nature of those, I think, would be determined in accordance with the city attorney, and I don't want to make a sweeping statement about what that looks like until that conversation is had. But we're experienced in managing those processes and having those conversations. We know the vocabulary and can have the conversation with the city attorneys and figure out what needs to happen per their recommendations. For your question, which I think was your first question about public meetings and facilitating public meetings, that the thing that I'd note there is that Kearns and West, Larry, Sarah, and I in particular, facilitate a number of other municipal, city, and county meetings. For example, Larry and I help to facilitate the City of Gainesville's City Council and their commission meetings in a hybrid space. So we're serving as the conduit for call-ins in those meetings virtually and remotely in accordance with the open meeting laws that they have in the state of Florida. We do similar work with Travis County in Texas, where Austin is. I do work with Arlington County, and there needs to have both virtual and in-person engagement, whatever is required for the open meeting law. So I think we're well versed in how to facilitate meetings that are all in person, that are all virtual, and are a mix. We can, provide guidance for the video needs, for the audio needs. We've done text call-ins or text-ins and phone calls and virtual polling, and plenty of ways to increase the interactiveness of hybrid meetings. And I think one of the things that we'll want to do at the outset of this, and it's in line with what Eduardo was saying before, is take a moment at the outset to define what the needs are for engagement, what form it needs to be. Is the emphasis on in person? Are we going to be able to reach more people for hybrid meetings? What do people feel safe doing, and how do they feel safe giving their story, and letting that define our approach. But the foundation there is that we're experienced in supporting a number of different communities of different sizes and different complexities to host their meetings in a virtual environment or hybrid environment impacted by COVID.
Madam Vice Chair, did we answer everything that you'd asked?
there was one that you guys missed. How familiar are you guys with the reports and reform plans so far? And I guess kind of in addition to that, with maybe, for lack of a better term, like the turmoil that has happened between RTRC, the relationship between the current members and council members, just your knowledge of that.
We've had the opportunity to watch a number of city council meetings and have borne witness to dynamics that exist there. Suffice to say, we can detect that from our removed distance. Excuse me. And we also are aware that this TRC originally had a set of members and now has a different membership, and that there was at one time what do you call it, like a spinoff, an additional TRC that had tried to do some work perhaps in parallel to this one. My understanding is that it is paused, but we know that this has been a bumpy road. And again, I'm not particularly surprised, because that's kind of what happens typically with TRCs. They are so bold, they are so meant to kind of push things beyond where they've gone before, that invariably there's going to be resistance. That doesn't mean it's justified. It just means that it is. And so I think we're aware of how much the police's handling of last summer's incidents have cast a pall on the commission, on the community, as it relates to what they want to see changed. But as you rightly pointed out, this is about more than just police. This is really about finding a way to create an equitable community where everyone feels that they can enjoy a meaningful quality of life. And so while we believe we need to pay close attention to what's being said and has been said about the police department, we understand that we need to continue to broaden the conversation at the same time. I also remember, Vice Chair, you asked about bringing police to the table. I think that that's a multi-pronged approach that can't be formulaic. What worked in Salt Lake City, what works in Elgin may or may not work in Iowa City. But I think that, in my study of it and my teaching of conflict resolution, the one thing I've always believed is that fundamental to dealing with conflict is to enable people to feel heard. And so sometimes it's a matter of giving a member of police department just a chance to be heard. Now, that may not be in a public setting at first. It may be in a smaller, more informal setting until they feel more comfortable sharing in a more open setting. But I can tell you, this is something we dealt with actively in Salt Lake City on an ongoing basis. We had officers who participated in more than one meeting. We had officers who came to one meeting. Some of those interactions were very fruitful and meaningful, and some of them were very tense and at times unproductive. But we don't believe that this commission is there to do the work of the police department. We believe it's there to do the work of the community. And so our job as facilitators is to make sure that the focus remains on the commission, the commissioners, and the community to whom they want to hear from whom they want to hear, as opposed to the department itself.
And then just very, very last one, I promise. Are you guys prepared, assuming we choose to recommend this to council next week? Would you guys be prepared to present to council and discuss this with them as well?
We absolutely would. Yeah, we absolutely would. I only want to mention that I believe they meet Tuesday, and that's Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, which I observe. And so Al, Sarah, and Eduardo would just be presenting in my stead if it were on Tuesday night because of my religious obligations.
Understandable. Go ahead.
This is Chastity Dillard. I first want to thank you all so much for presenting to us and providing this RFP. I just had one question, and it was really off of what you said, Dr. Schuler, when you said that this proposal is ambitious. And it was just wondering, I guess my question is, how do you think that could impact this work, and how effective do you think this 9-month process is really truly going to be, when you said that it's generally a 2-year process?
Well, I thank you very much, Commissioner, for the question. I mean, first of all, it's important to, compare apples and apples, so to speak. you all have been at this for more than, just now. I mean, you've obviously been working for several months. And so it's important as we evaluate how long a process like this might take to take into consideration that a good deal of work has already been done. So we're not really talking about 9 months. We're talking about probably 18 or even more months that could be expended. But I think that, it's important also to realize how different the circumstances are for TRCs. The Greensboro TRC was done without the blessing of the city of Greensboro, without any built-in funding. They had to essentially fundraise throughout the course of their work and barely had enough to afford a small staff. I mean, Eduardo certainly supported them, but he wasn't able to, I don't think, move to Greensboro permanently during that time. So they had a very small staff. They had volunteers, and they didn't have any city support. I mean, they had active city opposition for a good deal of their work. And so that prolonged things in a way that I think wouldn't necessarily be the case when you have, Stephanie and others able to assist you with carrying out your work and willing to assist with the resources like the ones we have for this meeting and so forth. I also think it depends a little bit on the scope of the work the TRC is embarking on and the size of the community. And Iowa City is certainly a large community, but there are others that are larger. And so part of it will depend upon the extent to which you all will feel that your work on community engagement is done. How will you measure that? And there's lots of different ways to do so, and we can talk about what those are. So I believe that in 9 months, we can ably assist you with meaningfully engaging the community, with getting extensive truth-telling to occur, and with conducting meaningful deliberations and issuing recommendations. It'll depend a little bit on, again, the overall scope of what it is that you want to cover, both in your recommendations and in your community engagement, as to how much you can accomplish in 9 months. But most assuredly, you can accomplish a great deal, and we stand ready to assist.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This is Commissioner Wangui Gadua.
Hello.
Hi. I am awed by being in the presence of a group of a firm that is accomplished in this area of inequity, because as I was looking into you, not really researching, that will take more time than I've had, but hearing you mention work with ICC, so you having done global, international, as well as national work, very impressive. And I am not going to use a lot of time. We've already used a lot of time because a lot of my comments I'm piggybacking on what has already been said and asked. And I am curious on, allow me to use the word and call you are outsiders to the Iowa City community. And this is me standing in being, Iowa City being my city since 2002. So, and a lot, the other communities members have been here even longer. So how is your presence going to be in Iowa City? I'm curious about that. And then I'll piggyback on what Commissioner Johnson had started on, going with the word like resistance, because you do work that is a motive that is controversial. There's a lot of minefields, and some of them, my curiosity and how you navigate this, it's not even from, for me, the areas I'm most concerned with is, for me, what I have in mind is as the TRC, the city council, and you, and your firm. So we are working on moving towards achieving equity. As we move, how within ourselves, how do we deal with, are we there ourselves, especially the three who are in the lead? And how do you usually deal with that? With ourselves who are there and on our journey? Are we there? Have we even begun? The other thing, how do you deal with the politics of the work, the media being in the midst, and sometimes could you be check a box, diffusing a situation, or a punching bag? And I'm going to stop there. I know I've just thrown all those things in there, but right now, that is what is going through my mind since when you began making your presentation. And I'm going to yield the floor and leave that to you to get your clarity on what I've spewed out.
Well, Commissioner, I hope I don't let you down. I hope we don't let you down. Your questions are certainly deeply meaningful and thoughtful, and I'll do my very best, and of course the rest of us will as well. You asked about our presence in Iowa City. Obviously, all of us are mindful of the state of our world as it relates to the pandemic, and we certainly want to comply with all relevant regulations and restrictions. I know the mayor of Iowa City has stuck his neck out a little bit in terms of pandemic restrictions, and the state of Iowa may be in a different place. The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, may be in a different place. But we're prepared to come to Iowa City multiple times to do this work with you all, to be with you in your journey, as you say, and to make sure that we are understanding as best we can the needs of the community in the process and the needs of the community in the outcomes. And that's something that we think, can only be gleaned, oftentimes can only be gleaned by being there. I will tell you, I am the father of two children who are not eligible for the vaccine, and so these are difficult times, but I believe that we will reach a point where our travel to Iowa City will be frequent and will enable us each and collectively to walk with you in that space. And I would just add, in trying to respond to some of your other questions about resistance and politics and checking a box, that trust is earned, and often actions will speak louder than words. And so just because I will perhaps sit down with a city council member or the mayor or some community organization and introduce myself, probably won't necessarily engender a lot of trust. But if they see that we have hosted events in their district, if it's a city council member, or we've co-hosted an event with a community organization where they had ownership and we simply were there in support and to provide additional resources or whatever role they asked us to play, and then they see that we have heeded their words and incorporated them either into process or into outcomes, I think that's the way people view it, as more than a box check. And they have to see us, they have to know us, they have to experience us. And that comes with time, that takes time, and it will require an investment of significant time on our part. And we're very prepared to do that, not just Kyle because of his ties and roots to the state and to the area, but all of us. We wouldn't be talking to you tonight if we didn't fully understand the need for us to to be on the ground with you, to sit with you, not just to conduct meetings formally with facilitation, but also just to learn about you, to learn about your journeys and your struggles as Iowa City residents and as just people of the world. So I confess, Commissioner, there was a lot there, and I don't know if I covered it all. I am going to see if Kyle, Sarah, and Eduardo would like to add in, but if we miss anything, please let us know. So any of my colleagues can join.
Thank you for capturing just me throwing things out. Captured everything.
Go ahead, Eduardo.
Just a point about the media that I think the commissioner also raised. I do think that the commission needs to have a media strategy, meaning that it needs to work with journalists so that journalists understand, first of all, what the Truth Commission is, what its mission and its vision are, and what its methodologies are. Otherwise, sometimes journalists may operate from a space of thinking that the commission is just another body of the city as any other, or may misunderstand the mission of the commission, etc. So I think it's very important to educate and work together with the media. There are excellent journalists in Iowa City, and I think it would be really necessary to engage with them. On the other side, I do think also that while it is important to be fully transparent in terms of the work of the commission, it's also important for the commission to have space for themselves, meaning to talk among the commissioners, to understand, to learn from others, and those kinds of spaces, if they are possible, should be fostered. So that is also important. And then I do think that there is always a delicate balance. On the one side, of course, you want to be responsive to the public and to the fourth estate. But at the same time, you also need to have space for yourselves to discuss, to understand, to take decisions, to digest the enormous amounts of information that you're going to be receiving.
I just wanted to add, Commissioner, that I was as I think I mentioned, actually, a journalist in my first career. And so I'm very tuned in to some of the needs and wants of the media. Of course, the media has evolved, but I believe that we are well positioned, as Eduardo just described, to assist you all with a thoughtful strategy on how best to engage them on a go-forward basis.
Kevo, do you have any questions?
Yeah, thank you. This is Kevo Rivera.
Hey, Commissioner.
Respond to all pronouns, including he, she, and they. Thank you all for preparing this proposal. It was very comprehensive and really addressed a lot of the things not only listed in our RFP, but that we had been having in some of our subcommittee meetings. And so I've been very encouraged to see the breadth of your expertise in the scope of this proposal. My first question is for Kyle. I just want to know a little bit more about you and kind of your level of involvement in our community. Specifically, some follow-up questions would be like, what connections do you have to the BIPOC community of Iowa City? And what work have you done that pertains to equity and inclusion?
Yeah, those are both great questions, and I'm happy to address them. The first thing that I'll mention is just my academic background. I did my undergraduate at the University of Iowa Political Science, and then I went and did my PhD work in the Department of Communication Studies. My PhD work is in climate justice and environmental justice, particularly how Black and Indigenous voices in the climate movement can be elevated to inform science and solutions to climate change. And so the movement politics were a core portion of my academic work. But really what I want to focus on is my personal investment in the BIPOC community in Iowa City, and in particular the University of Iowa. The main example that I'll focus on was in my time as the debate coach at the University of Iowa, where one of the core focuses in my time as a debate coach at the University of Iowa was increasing the recruitment and retention of particularly Black voices into the debate program, working with what are called the urban debate leagues from across the United States to recruit Black or minority students to join the University of Iowa debate team, and to promote alternative ways of going about debating styles that were based in Black experience and Black voice. identifying folks who can readily coach those students, and encouraging and helping make a livable space on campus for those students once they had come to the University of Iowa. And that's frankly, when I was working full-time as a graduate student, where I spent the majority of my time and where the focus of my efforts were with the BIPOC community in Iowa City. I'm happy to report that the University of Iowa, while I was a coach, won a national championship in debate, and we had wonderful success and outcomes, but also reformed the way that we were engaging the Department of Communication Studies, the way that we were addressing the scholastic efforts of the debate community, and bringing those voices into the city.
Thank you. And then this question is for maybe anyone who wants to answer. I think Larry kind of touched on this a little bit when we were kind of asking about your understanding of what has sort of gone on in our proceedings thus far. But as we've been doing this work, it's clearly been very emotional. We've all been, as commissioners, been very heavily invested in this. And in a lot of ways, I'm glad that we have remained so close to the work. I also see the value in having a third sort of, in some ways, neutral party that can help sort of provide feedback to help give us other perspectives to the scope of our work. And so if I can bug you for some free consultation tonight, how would you tell the story of our commission thus far? Like what has gone on and where do you see things going?
It's a powerful question, Commissioner, and I certainly want Eduardo to weigh in based on his lengthy engagement. Look, I mean, I think that in some ways the Iowa City TRC story is not unlike several others in the TRC space. A struggle to be heard and to be recognized with a legitimate cause, a moment of sort of political blessing, followed by a significant amount of inner turmoil in determining who this TRC wants to be and how it wants to proceed, followed by a fissure, a real dividing point, and now I think a period of healing. I mean, I have received you all both in this meeting and in the meetings I've observed of the City Council and of the TRC as strong people who are in some ways invigorated by the work ahead of you and the challenges that face you. And that's one of the reasons I'm so energized to be part of this conversation, is because I feel that despite how far physically I am from you. So it appears to me to be, a story of triumphs and travails that's very similar to what I've seen in other TRCs and frankly in other commissions like this around the United States here in recent months and years. And my hope and my faith, my belief is that the best is yet to come for the Iowa City TRC. But I'd love for Eduardo to add in.
Commissioner, I believe very strongly that you are called to be healers of your city. But having said that, I don't think anyone would expect you, on top of being healers, to be saints. All of us, if we are called to do this job, have to recognize our own wounds. We are wounded healers because all of the experiences that people are going to come to refer to us are experiences we have seen, we have suffered, people who are loved to us have suffered, and that we have seen in different communities, in different places. So what has happened up to this point should be summarized in that way. Iowa wants to heal, and Iowa is recognizing that those who are supposed to heal, to help Iowa heal, are wounded themselves. And that is what makes things so difficult, but also so promising, because you are not going to be indifferent therapists or a technocrat sitting in a room listening to people in a detached way. You are going to be very involved, and you are very involved. That is the reason why the turmoil happened too. These things require all of us to recognize our own experiences and our own difficulties, our own inadequacies too. So if we are prepared to accept those difficulties, those shortcomings, I think we are in a better place already.
Thank you.
And, Commissioner Johnson, did you want to go next? I think you had your hand up before mine.
Yeah, I feel like this question has kind of been answered to a degree, but I kind of want to ask it again. When would you consider a TRC's work to be done?
Commissioner, I would say that, as much of a way out of an answer that this might be, TRCs function on the basis of some sort of mandate. You can call it a mission statement, you can call it a vision, but mandate is the term that I've seen used most frequently. And so the fulfillment of that mandate, much like an objective to a single meeting is placed on the top of an agenda, the fulfillment of that mandate is a good part of the way that I think of a TRC's work as being done. I think the unique thing about a TRC as compared to any other kind of task force or working group is that it's possible your work won't be done in the way that that we're talking about it. It's possible that we will reach the conclusion of the work that we have scoped out here as a group and decide we must continue. And that's the case in Salt Lake City. The Racial Equity and Policing Commission was, I think, intended to be a 6-month endeavor, and it is now essentially being funded on a recurring and permanent basis by Salt Lake City, and will continue to provide needed input and oversight. So, it's a tricky question from that vantage for me, because I don't know that even the members of the TRCs I'm most closely familiar with would say that their work is done. Perhaps they as a collective have completed their tasks as delineated by their mandates, but many of them I know, especially in Greensboro, where reform has taken more than a decade, view their work as incomplete. Some of them have died, since they finished their work and weren't able to stick around long enough to see it done, but others are bearing witness to it, and it has taken 15 or more years for some of their work to be completed, and they've been a part of that. So I hope that nuance of an answer is helpful. I think that it's complex and not easy to simplify. Eduardo, you want to add in?
No, you are completely right. Formally, the work of the commission is going to end whenever the legal mandate says so. But on a more profound way, certainly commissions open a chapter in the history of their cities and communities. In Greensboro, they took a lot of time to ensure that the Truth Commission report was accepted by the City Council. When they first issued the report, the City Council rejected the report in a vote on a race basis, basically. It took years for them to have the report finally accepted. Then more years to have the City Council establish a community policing board that was able to start a process of reform. And then just a couple of years ago, the City of Greensboro initiated a process of apology and reparation for the Greensboro massacre. And that has taken a long time. Certainly it's the same when truth commissions are not in a city, but in a country. In my own country, in Peru, the Truth Commission ended its work 18 years ago. And we have done a lot of progress in terms of, putting some perpetrators in jail, ensuring reparations to victims, creating museums, and so on. But we are far from being a fully reconciled society. So I suspect that the way you put the question has to do with that, has to do with the long-term nature of this work.
I appreciate your answers. I personally feel that a Truth and Reconciliation Commission is almost, I don't see where it ever should disappear. Personally, that's how I feel, because there's always something that we need to work on for progress. So I appreciate your answers, and that I yield.
Commissioner, it's not all that different in my view from our roles as students. You know, we may graduate from college, as Kyle mentioned, graduating and receive a certificate and be entitled to certain privileges and so forth. But any of us who stop studying and stop learning after we receive that piece of paper is obviously foolish.
I just have a few questions to, and then I'm done with mine. But first and foremost, how do you see if there are ever any disagreements between your group and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission? How do you see us mediating that?
The Truth and Reconciliation Commission is in charge here. We are here to support you. Now, we're here to advise you. We're here to make recommendations to you. But we will yield if ever there was a circumstance where we and you felt things should go in a different direction. I experience this all the time. I mean, not to suggest that I have conflicts all the time. I just mean to say that you know, clients or organizations with whom I'm working will often want to do things differently than I would recommend. I am not in charge. They are. So in my view, there's not a need for any kind of a formal process there, other than simply to say, you know, we've provided you with the input that we have, and it is your decision as to how we move forward, and we will abide whatever that decision is. That's what our job is in this case. I hope that answers your question, Chairman.
Yes, very well, actually. I'd like to ask as well, when it comes to researching things in the past. So one thing I'm very wary of is research into histories of things such as property ownership, and also in cases where city governments in the past have had requests for proposal for developments and things of that nature. How much experience do you have in researching these types of things?
A great deal. Sarah briefly mentioned that I'm supporting, or that we're supporting, the City of Austin's equity-based historic preservation plan, and I just put together a 3-hour workshop that documents in depth some of the more, I think it's fair to say, racist planning measures that were taken by the City of Austin over the last century, and in particular, you know, incidents of redlining and, you know, racial segregation and the closure of schools that catered to the BIPOC community and so forth. But I also was employed by the City of Austin for 10 years. And one of the most important things that a municipality does is oversee land use and planning and zoning. And so I was reviewing, you know, dozens of those kinds of cases on an annual basis, both calls for proposal for what to do with a piece of land, as well as, you know, someone requesting some kind of new entitlement or, you know, tax rebate or what have you, and was knee deep in that as a part of my role. So I don't know if others want to add in, but that was certainly a focal point of my career prior to joining Kearns.
So there was a portion where we talked about the active presence nature of your time in Iowa City during this process. And then I also did hear a comment about maybe more or less facilitation being needed at certain points. So one thing I would like to address is just the factor of the need for community collaboration, and also the difficulty of possibly procuring more stakeholders, but also just that I believe it's important to truly make them stakeholders in the fact that they're valued for their time and expertise lent. In your past experience with TRCs, is there any kind of request for proposal process where those stakeholders do join? And then also, is there room in your past experience for them to have their organizations compensated for their time and efforts?
Yes, I mean, is the answer in simple, but I mean, I think that we have reached a point in the field of public engagement and in restorative and transitional justice where we have recognized that it is, you know, very hard to ask someone to give of their time and not expect there to be some recognition of that, acknowledgement of that, or perhaps compensation. No two cases are the same, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I don't want to suggest that, just because one commission was pro bono and one commission gave stipends and one commission paid salaries or funded nonprofits or what have you, that is the way it is to be done. Canada's commission, for example, had, dozens of staff people and medical professionals engaged and retained, and millions of dollars with which to work. So, it's important to be, cognizant of what resources there are. But as it relates to providing the support that would be needed to bring about the engagement you're suggesting, I think that could be a very worthwhile investment for this TRC to undertake, and we would do all we could to help it occur.
Just the final question I would have before I yield is, in your history of working with TRCs, when there is that actual monetary backing from the city, how often do you see a reimbursement or a stipend component to the members of that actual commission?
The notion of a stipend or any other kind of compensation is was very important to Canada. I mean, again, they understood that an undertaking of that magnitude could not be done by someone occasionally popping in as a volunteer. It required a tremendous amount of investment of time. The three commissioners, if you can believe that, there was a national commission with only 3 commissioners, traveled to either end of that massive country and to great distances, into the northern part of the state that's more inaccessible, to hear testimony firsthand. And so that contrasted greatly with Greensboro, where the commissioners were paid, nothing, and Maine, where, as I understand it, they were not compensated. Some of them could maybe do it as part of an existing position they held, either in state government or in their Native American tribal organizations, but they were not separately paid. I perceive that the investment of time that you all have made and are making and desire to make is extremely significant, and time is a valuable commodity. And so we've certainly seen plenty of cases, not just in Canada, but elsewhere, where that recognition of how much time is needed to do this work properly is linked to compensation. And so we see that as justifiable, and we understand that the amounts may or may not align with everyone's aspirations or their calculations of what the time is worth. But sometimes it's about more than just the amount. It's about the gesture. It's about the willful commitment of funds to something that matters. I don't know that there's necessarily, I should say also, though, that Salt Lake City did pay stipends to its members for the Racial Equity and Policing Commission. I don't believe we've heard one way or the other about the Elgin Commission at this point in terms of that, but I know Salt Lake City did. So there's certainly precedent.
Thank you.
Of course.
I don't want to go over this. I mean, I know we've already gone over this hour, but I don't want to mess up the procedure and whatnot.
I think we do have a question still remaining from Commissioner Johnson.
Yeah, I feel like you covered things quite well, because I was going to ask about the stipend myself. We can also always organize to not accept that money and give it to whatever local organization that could possibly need it if we didn't want to take those funds on ourselves. And I assume that you guys can help us organize that and get that squared away without even a problem.
Correct.
Yeah. I had one more question, and off the top of my head, it's kind of left me for a split second, but it was so far. I appreciate your time, and things sound good. And yeah, if it comes across me again, I would like to ask again later. Thank you.
No problem. No problem.
Larry, can I clarify something about the budget proposal?
Sure.
So on the part up at the very top, it says role. And I know there's multiple people who are strategic advisors and directors and associates. I'm just wondering, I was trying to kind of do this while I was reading this stuff, trying to figure out who would fall into what category, just because their rates are very different. So I was just wondering if you could let me know or let us know who falls into each category when we're talking about project manager, advisor, blah, blah, you know.
Sure. Forgive me that I don't have the whole budget in front of me right this minute, but I mean, I am a director. Kyle is a director. Sarah is a senior associate. Eduardo, by virtue of his position at the Mary Hoke Center for Reconciliation at George Mason, doesn't have a specific hourly rate attached because he's doing this work for us as part of his role there, which is fantastic, miraculous even. The other gentlemen, Dante James and Shafin Roberts from Denver and from Los Angeles, are private independent practitioners with their own hourly rates. They both were attorneys or are attorneys, so they are accustomed to kind of a different scale or different type of billing perhaps than we are. So hope that answers your question.
Do any other commission members have any questions they'd like to ask?
And Commissioner Johnson might have remembered what he was trying to think of.
I did. About resets when it comes down to committees, our Truth and Reconciliation committees. Have you dealt with those before? Has there been resets where you had to drop an entire team in order to start from scratch again? And how did you deal with that if that's the case?
Well, before you said the last part, Commissioner Johnson, I was going to say, that in Salt Lake City, we did have a reset. I mean, we came in probably, 5 or 6 meetings into their work, which was not, our preference. Just that is what it is. There wasn't anything we could do about it. And there was a good amount of time expended trying to just determine the best way for us to serve them and the best way for them to operate to achieve the objectives that they had. And I can go into more detail in terms of those changes, but suffice it to say, we did not obviously direct them to do anything. We didn't tell them, do this, do that. We simply said, here's some things that we're noticing that we think are worthy of your consideration. And some of them they took too readily, others they didn't, and we continued down the path. I don't know if Kyle, Sarah, or Eduardo have other sort of case studies in this regard. I mean, that's what comes to mind for me. Canada, for what it's worth, Canada did start out with one set of commissioners who all resigned under protest, which I thought was very interesting. And they did so because of, as I understand it, government interference. And so the next set of commissioners insisted upon a level of autonomy, a level of independent judgment that I think they then received. And I think they had an enormously successful endeavor when it was all said and done. But that was a big bump. There's no question.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Actually, I do just have one final question that comes to mind. When it comes to our stated charges, if it were to be said to you by government officials that they believe that it needed to be amended, what do you think of the current structure of the charges, and do they seem typical of a TRC and what it needs to succeed?
Mr. Chairman, another good question. I'm reluctant to say whether something is typical in the world of TRCs, because there's so much variety in, is a commission meant to look at local matters? Is it meant to look at state or national? There have been commissions that have examined current states of affairs. There have been commissions that have looked much further back. So it's hard to say whether or not the mission of the or the mandate or the call, so to speak, of the Iowa City TRC is typical. I mean, certainly its attention to restorative justice, its attention to bearing witness to truth, its collection of testimony in public hearings. I mean, all of that is very much of a piece with what most, if not all, TRCs set out to do. I don't know necessarily the answer to a question about what to do in the event the city council wanted to amend that. I mean, I think that would have to obviously be sorted out because in a way, I believe the TRC to be, in charge of its own work, but of course was commissioned by the city. And so there'd have to be some dialogue if there was a desire to change the way in which you all operated. And we would be providing the advice that we have based on our judgment of what would make a TRC a success.
Well, I guess to just clarify it, that in that case, do you believe that that it is lacking, or does it seem to be sufficient?
No, I don't believe it's lacking at all. I mean, I think that we will have plenty of questions to ask you about, the specifics of what meetings should cover, what public events should cover. But as it relates to the mandate or the call itself, no, I don't believe it to be insufficient.
I'll take the floor and I'll take just a second.
I think Eduardo had a response.
Yes, I don't think it's lacking. I think it's actually very ambitious. The charges under the mandate are 3, if I'm not wrong: fact-finding, truth-telling, and reconciliation. And each of those is pretty detailed. You are supposed to do fact-finding, that is to document those injustices in the city of Iowa City that correspond to the problems that the city wants to address. Issues of racial injustice, of inequity, etc. You are supposed not only to find the information, but also to create platforms, to create a forum so that people can talk, which is why Kearns and West's proposal indicates also a time in the timeline to have that kind of public engagement debates. And then the most difficult one is that you are charged with reconciliation, right? That is to provide opportunities for people to talk directly. Now I have opened the resolution, right? And that is interesting because you are supposed to create opportunities for people to talk to each other, people who normally don't talk to each other, and institutions that normally don't listen to the public to sit down and talk. And that is what is under the charge of reconciliation. So I do think that the 3 charges are actually very ambitious. So I don't think it's lacking. I think you have a lot of material there to cover. And actually, to link this with a previous question, I think there is going to be a significant investment of your time in this.
Just want to apologize. I'm the father of 2 young children and there was a ruckus behind me. So I'm sorry I had to turn away there for a moment.
No apologies needed. We would just have Commissioner Gatto and then also Commissioner Johnson, but I don't have any further questions.
Yeah, for me, it's I've been curious since you applied to work with us. I wonder why do you want to work with us? And I am done with my questions. I yield.
Commissioner, I believe truth and reconciliation is one of the most important undertakings humanity can have. And in particular, one of the most important undertakings for the United States. It has been far too long in coming. The United States, the American people is often, contented to turn their gaze away from that which they don't like to see and turn towards the next shiny object, whatever that might be. And I think that our country has finally said enough. And I feel as if my professional life, but also my personal life and my academic life have all sort of brought me to a place where this is what I believe I'm meant to do with the education and the skills and the experience that I've had. And this is the best way I can serve.
We have one more question and then we'll wrap it up.
My last question is, everyone, what are your thoughts on critical race theory?
I'm chuckling only, Commissioner Johnson, because I'm astonished at how badly misinterpreted and misunderstood critical race theory has been. I live in a state that just tonight concluded their legislative special session with some sort of bizarre ban on critical race theory that makes virtually no sense. Critical race theory is in some ways a statement of the obvious. I don't mean to undermine the people who, developed it, but who among us could deny the significance of race to every aspect of American life? Who could possibly dare to suggest that we have reached some sort of, post-racial society where race isn't a dictate of, unfortunately, far too many, outcomes. So, I mean, it seems odd to say whether I'm for or against it. I mean, it's simply a distillation, in my view, of the way things are, sad as that may be. And I think that, even if I were in some way uncomfortable with it, and I'm not, but even if I were, the idea that a legislative body should tell teachers what to teach is even more problematic and probably indicative of the very foundations of the theory. Because after all, the legislature is a predominantly, white institution, and they are, deciding that they should dictate to teachers, both white and of color, what they should teach. And that to me is as indicative of racism as anything. So I'm sure I could say more, but suffice to say, I believe it is truth. It is a part of our truth.
If anybody else would like to comment as well, I'm more than welcome.
Yeah, I actually want to bring this back to the very first slide that I shared about the neutrality statement that Kearns and West operates under, and just take a moment to recognize that neutrality does not mean obliviousness to fact, and historical fact in particular. And I think what critical race theory does is evidence and makes clear the historical foundation of anti-Blackness and racism as a founding principle of American public life. And I think that that's what Truth and Reconciliation Commissions are about at their core, that methodologically and performatively, they are a desire to make that fact public, to evidence how that foundational sin of American public life plays out in lives to this day. And the type of pain and scars that it produces. And so, I think that, Larry, you mentioned, the danger is people who don't take the time to see what's happening there. I think that's exactly what's happening with this turn against critical race theory. It's a desire, or it's a reflex to not look at the pain and trauma that exists within the community. And I view this work as doing some of the effort to actively challenge those gestures and bring those things to life. So, I think that it maybe is not explicitly referenced, but the tenets of critical race theory are endemic or a core part of truth and reconciliation within America, and I don't think that they can be separated in any way.
I agree with Kyle and Larry, and the only thing I want to add here is this goes back to not shying away from having the difficult conversations.
Just to say, there is a difference between objectivity and neutrality. I think we can be objective about the facts, and we need to do that. But we cannot be ethically neutral. I think we also need to be on the side of the persons who have suffered the injustices that we are going to unveil. Objective about the facts say one thing or another, but ethically we need to be empathetic to decide who has been on the receiving end. Having said that, commissioners and to the team. I will need to leave the meeting in a couple of minutes, as I only had reserved 2 hours for it, and I have also some family obligations here in Brooklyn. Sorry.
I appreciate your time. Thank you guys for answering my questions.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, with that, I think we'll wrap it up. As the process moves on, we will be in touch. And thank you very much for being with us.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
We'll now move on to agenda item number 5.
Before you move on to that, I didn't know if anyone had any questions for Teresa while she's here. Sometimes you have questions about the process or what you can and cannot do, whether you can have direct contact with them or not. And so since she's here, it would just be a great opportunity for you to ask directly.
All those questions that she just mentioned, all those
The
examples.
process moving forward, starting with.
Well, the process is going to be a little different because you guys are directly under the council. So I think what we should probably do is if you guys have questions about the RFP, and I mean the RFP, not go ahead and email them to me. I'll put something together and then we'll send it off to them. It's gonna, right now then after that, you're gonna have to take it to the council and see if you can get the funding for it.
So basically, you said if we have questions to send them to you.
Like,
Okay.
send them to me and then I'll get only I can have contact with them. So if there's anything you want to know, send me your comments and I'll get the answers for you. And then after that, we're going to work on getting it on the agenda.
Council's agenda.
The council
Okay.
agenda, that's right.
Okay.
And do you anticipate that being difficult, the way you said that?
No, it's not difficult.
Okay.
No.
So if we decide tonight, then we would need to communicate with you if any amendments need to be made to council's agenda on Tuesday.
I don't think there's time to get it for the next meeting. We have to put it in a system and it's got to go through and get put in the packet. So
Okay.
it'll probably be the following
And
council meeting.
And what Teresa's referring to is if you choose if you choose to recommend to the city council that you want to hire them.
okay.
That's what she's referring to. She's saying the first possible date that the council would probably be able to consider that would be their September 21st date. Now, your budget is on the city council meeting for this Tuesday, the 7th. That does not change. Those are two different things, but dependent upon one another, right? You're going to need the approval of the city council if you choose to move forward with this firm.
So we'll need you to fill out your scoring sheets and then get those into me.
I have a question
By
for you
when?
on that. Number 2, references.
Yes, and then references, we're going to have to decide who's going to check them. Usually it's one of you. You can split them up, or you can have one person do it, and then they would make notes on the references, distribute them to the group, and then you would score on them that way. I recommend you just kind of come up with some questions, a set of questions, and then you ask all the references the same question.
So to summarize, the order of operations is in order to complete these, someone needs to first contact the references and then report back to us. And then based on these evaluations, is that the decision to move forward with this firm or not? And then after that, if we can come to a consensus, then we propose to city council the RFP and approval of it and the budget that they've given us. Okay. We're still a long ways out.
On this last page, farm, who, does it matter who writes the name? I'm assuming it's Kearns and West.
Since you only have one, it's just Kearns and West, yeah.
Okay.
Are we supposed to do anything with this page?
No, it's
Yeah,
just
that's
for
what I
your
was
notes.
asking.
Oh, okay, this is just notes.
And then one last question. So if we wanted to make an amendment to the Tuesday council with their budget, then does that need your approval? Instead of having our budget, we would amend it so that it would be their budget.
I think for the meeting on Tuesday, when you get to that agenda item, if you want to eliminate other line items and just stick with the cost of the facilitator for the council's consideration on Tuesday, then that's something you as a commission can decide.
Okay.
If that answers your question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
With that, we now move to agenda item number 5, which is public comment on Kearns and West proposal and presentation. So if any members of the public do have anything that they would like to ask or just comment on, just want to remind commissioners that we are not to engage with the public. Anyone in the Zoom version of the meeting, if you would like to raise your hand, if you have anything to say. Okay. With that, it does look like we are on to agenda item number 6, which is discussion on the proposal and presentation by Kearns and West by the Ad Hoc Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I would just like to say first and foremost that just remember that we do have 2 more meetings this month. And what it is sounding like is that, at least in my opinion, the rest of your opinions also are needed here, but instead of voting on that actual aspect of going through with them, that we may want to just take this time to reflect and just make sure we are going through these references, because of the fact that it is not guaranteed that council does also approve this group. So if the references are also checked, I feel like that would leave more certainty on that aspect, or at least raise the possibility. And then for that to be on the council's next meeting, September 21st, I believe that would be, we would still have another meeting at the end of the month. So if they are to approve it at the September 21st meeting, we would be able to begin with them from what the facilitator group said as well at the end of this month. Does anyone else have anything they would like to add to that?
That makes sense.
Okay. I don't have anything further to add on the discussion aspect, other than thank you all for coming prepared with those questions and for being flexible on the timing as well. And just very glad that we did have this process in this way. I believe it worked out very well. Got a lot of great information on that. Then now we're just on to agenda item number. Oh, sorry.
We should talk about who's going to take on the task of checking the references.
I've already kind of started to begin doing that, in just the sense that I do have contacts on the Elgin task force. So have asked them directly about their thoughts and just continuing to compile them. So I'm going to be calling my contacts on that Elgin task force in itself, following up with them further on who actually is involved in that. So that'll give a little more clarity. So I can just be sure to have an email to the entire commission by Monday at the latest on what I do know from that group. And in terms of the lines of,
I think that we do need to contact specifically the people listed.
Yes. Also, I like what we're just told, that we should compile a list of questions so that it's consistent. And we understand exactly what is being asked of the reference. But I do appreciate the information that you have talked to people already. So I think we need to do this correctly.
we should set a timeline for when people should have a list of questions to you, maybe if you're prepared to be the person. So when we should have questions to you, and then when you hope to be in contact with all of these people, when we should expect maybe a report back. Or is that just maybe for our next meeting?
I know it gets complicated, but not trying to disrupt the flow, but it would be best if the questions were sent to me and then I send them to Mohammed.
That's what I was just.
Yeah. But that's, we can go, excuse me, sorry, we can still go with the time frame or timeline that you want, but just be mindful that the questions be sent to me and I can format them, and that way when they're sent to him, they're just all in one document.
And can someone point out where the references are in this? I can't
It's
find
on
it.
it's after page 22.
Okay, there it is.
Since council won't be able to look at this until the 21st, then I think we should maybe give us until next week sometime. Is that doable?
Yeah, I'd say if we could have a soft deadline of next Wednesday to get questions to Stephanie, and then by the latest next Friday, because that would just allow at least a few days to get to the references, but also to compile the responses, and then still have enough time to have those together for our following meeting, and then to make sure that we are prepared for that city council meeting.
And just a question / suggestion, could we do it as a Google Doc where we could all see in real time? Are we allowed to do that?
I think the problem with Google Docs is it's kind of an electronic way to have a meeting informally. So I guess I wouldn't suggest that. I know it might add an extra layer, but it's probably best just to send them to me.
Okay. And Chair, if you want to do them all on your own, that's fine. But if you'd like help, I would be willing to help as well.
That'd be great, actually.
Yeah.
I think just with just the rapport with Elgin so far, I'd be comfortable taking that one. And then in terms of Salt Lake City and Austin, if anyone would prefer to choose one or the other.
Salt Lake City.
Okay.
I don't know which one is not taken.
So that'd be the city of Austin.
And Teresa, do you have any templates of like reference questions just that I could send out that would they wouldn't necessarily have to use those questions, but just something that kind of has a layout or a format?
I'll see what I can find.
Okay, thank you.
Wonderful. You're gonna send them to us?
Yeah, yes.
Thank you.
Sounds like we have that straightened out. So get questions to Stephanie's soft deadline by next Wednesday, but at the latest by next Friday. So with that, now on to agenda item number 7, which would be vote on whether to recommend to the city council that Kearns and West be selected as an independent contractor / facilitator for the Ad Hoc Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So again, just on this, just in terms of the timeline, ensuring the process is done right and the references, we would want to defer this agenda item. Would we agree on that?
I do.
Well, would it be too late if we told them on the 17th that we wanted to recommend this, though? Does that fit in the timeline for when it can be in the council packet? If their meeting is on the 21st, then we're not making a decision on the 17th until the 17th. That would affect it.
They would post their packet on the 16th.
Yeah, so we need to make a decision before then. Yeah.
I mean,
so
is there something we could do where we could still just, I mean, we already have our notes. We're already looking at the references. Could we still submit it to city council prior to the 16th and still have our vote on the 17th? Because then they'd still at least have the items.
Procedurally, what's the sort of importance of us submitting these to you with an evaluator score before we can move forward?
Since you only have one, you're not really scoring against other RFPs.
yeah.
So what you're trying to establish is whether or not you want to hire them or not. So I think it's really important that you do check the references. You can find out a lot about a firm from references. If you want to check the reference, I mean, but the problem with references is a lot of times you can't get a hold of people. So that's going to be challenging for you guys is just getting a hold of people. If I'm not sure how many references they have listed in here.
Three.
You'll want to get back to me right away if you can't get a hold of anyone, and maybe we can have Kearns and West get a different reference for you.
So
The significance of the score is, I mean, it's basically just whether you really want to hire them or not.
So could that go to city council with just like a vote on a recommendation from us? Or does it have
Yes.
to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
There's nothing in the RFP that says they have to have a certain amount of points
Okay.
for you to recommend them. So as long as we got confirmation from all of you that you want to move forward, we could get it in the packet.
So we should vote today.
Yeah, we need to vote today.
I am okay with voting today.
I'm still unclear on that aspect because it sounds like as long as we have all the documents in prior to the 16th, then the agenda item for the city council could be to the vote on our recommendation, which has that gray area in the way it's written of what the recommendation from us is, because they would still have all the information in the packet and have knowledge of over 4 days of whatever our vote was.
So we don't know if we're
Maybe.
recommending, right? And we're deciding whether or not we're recommending based on whether or not we contact these references and just see if these people are who they say they are, right? And so I think the point is taken that we really ought to talk to people who have worked with these individuals, get their thoughts. And then I think that we should decide at our next meeting whether or not we recommend, and we can either go through these evaluations or just vote as a commission. Either way, we won't have something in the city packet for the 21st meeting. So I think that that's the timeline.
Yeah, because I think even if you recommend it on the 16th, that's not going to be a contract that Teresa's worked with them to put together to be a part of that package, unless Teresa, you think that you could. I mean, I don't know how.
This is just so unusual.
Yeah.
Because you guys are directly under the city council. So normally when we do a project, we already have the budget worked out and you guys don't. So we're going to have to think about how we're going to do this.
I think time is really important, and I'm feeling pessimistic from conversations I've had with mayor and mayor pro tem. I really think that we should get this figured out at this meeting today and then figure the rest out. I don't think that waiting till after their 21st meeting should even be an option, to be honest.
I would just have to say that I can't agree with that just off the fact that if we don't check the references, then we're voting before we've even checked the references. And if there's anything else that's found that we don't like, then we've already voted to recommend, and then that just shoots the entire thing down.
And I think Teresa and I and Dennis, I mean, you know, if this is something you choose to move forward with at the meeting on the 16th, I would hope that, you know, there would be a way to hopefully get that on the agenda for the 16th, or excuse me, for the 21st. If on the 16th you decide that, you know, this based upon the references, you want to move forward with them.
I have to agree with Commissioner Amel. I think time is of essence. Maybe I'm a little bit more optimistic that our references are going to come back pretty stellar. And this is very important. We only have one RFP. I think we should vote tonight.
I disagree.
Yeah,
I think that
I disagree as well.
Like I understand the urgency. You know, we've been at this for a really long time, and this has been a long, drawn out process. So I'm impatient as well. I also get the excitement, right? We've just got, I think, a really great presentation, and I feel very enthusiastic and optimistic as well. But I think that if we're going to be a commission that really tries to seek truth and make recommendations based on that, I think that we should also sort of model making sure that we are getting all the data that's available to us. Sometimes that takes time. In this case, it takes maybe an extra 2 weeks for us. And that's all we're saying is it just takes an extra 2 weeks. So I think that we should go procedurally through sort of what we suggested thus far.
I have to say I agree. Quality, if we're looking for quality, we got to take the time to look. And if we rush things through, strong possibility to get shut down completely because we didn't look it up. This is one of the reasons why I believe that we should, our timeline needs to be extended. That's just my own personal thoughts.
Yeah. Just very wary of the backlash of things being said, such as voting to approve before seeing the references, maybe that becoming a story, and then that being used as leverage to shoot it down. And also just that factor of knowing that it's already contentious. So I want to give as little reason as possible to have any reason to shoot it down. Want it to truly be that difficult decision of if it's being shot down, it's on something immaterial rather than having something material to point to.
Okay, so just a compromise, just because I don't understand, are we able to have a special vote beforehand if we get the references?
I was just going to mention that too. I think that we should just have a special vote.
If we make a goal to have the references completed by next week, like I'll start calling these people tomorrow and leaving messages. I would just really like to get this figured out so that it can be on the agenda, and then they have time to prep for what they're going to say to city council and how they're going to defend asking city council for, $298,000.
And so with that, I think it would be best if our chair and vice chair figure out the questions. And then if you still need me to help call, I can. And then instead of us waiting until next Friday, I think that would speed up the process a little bit.
Stephanie suggested that we can get the questions from Teresa.
Mm-hmm.
I can find.
Yeah.
I can be able to start to call City of Austin tomorrow.
Still need the questions.
Yeah, we should figure out the questions before we do that. So I'll just, I'll reach out to people individually. You guys can think about, is that okay if I text people individually and then find a time to Zoom with less than quorum to discuss it next week? On our own?
I think possibly tomorrow, the folks who have volunteered to reach out to the references could at least call or email and maybe set aside of time for next week to say, are you available Friday at 8 o'clock for me to ask you these 10, 15 questions? So that way, at least you're not kind of chasing a reference next week when you have all the questions from commission members.
Great.
I mean, commissioners can start sending me questions 24/7. So, I mean, they can send them now to me. You can just tell me when you want me to kind of stop accepting them and just send you the compiled list of questions and add it with what Teresa may be able to find too.
Okay. So then what I can do tomorrow is reach out to all three of these people and try to set up a time next week to speak to them and let staff know what times they suggest or whatever. And then you can communicate that with the rest of the commission.
Sounds good.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Should we also set a date for our special vote then?
How would that work?
I think you can vote on the 16th. I mean, if there are times at a council meeting where something is withdrawn off of agenda. So I think you'd be okay.
And I hate to be pessimistic, but like, how confident are you that they would be willing to allow this to be in the packet on the 16th?
I think we can probably get a placeholder on like consider recommendation and agreement on TRC facilitator. as hopefully as an agenda item. And then if stuff doesn't, come to pass as quickly as the group thought, then they could defer it to that first meeting in October.
Okay.
So to close the loop, Vice Chair is going to contact the 3 references to try to set up meetings. In the meantime, all commissioners are going to be thinking of and forwarding our questions to Steph, who will then send them back to Vice Chair and any other interested parties who'd be willing to participate in those interviews with the references. Once those occur, they'll kind of compile their thoughts and what was heard during those meetings and conversations, and then we'll discuss those during our next meeting in 2 weeks. And then on that day, we can have an agenda item on whether or not to formally recommend this firm as our facilitator. Does that sound reasonable? And
Yeah.
we think that we can get this on the agenda for the 21st.
And I did notice Commissioner Daniel and Commissioner Nobis had their hands raised. They're no longer raised, but I did notice that.
I'm okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And then is it okay to move on to the next agenda item, you think? Are we good? To vote on whether to approve the amended budget presented to the city council on August 17th. So I think there's definitely a discussion that we should have, because Stephanie did make a good point last week or at the last meeting, and I did reach out to members of council. And I do think that it's important that we first submit the total for the facilitator fee and whatnot, and then have them with their expertise help us with our budget. Just because I think that they might be able to better draft a budget and defend a budget, since they have that expertise and know kind of what these things entail. But I'm open to any other discussion or opinions about that.
I'd have to agree. And I think if I remember correctly, we kind of settled on that in the last meeting, but we just want to have a formal vote on it just to make sure. And also for everyone just to remember that the final total that they did have was 198,000, but had put on for the line item 200,000 and justified it to them as in case of any incidental reason, like maybe some emergency travel or something that was unforeseen. So just that piece. They did say we can amend budgets if needed, but yeah, it sounds like we should just do the amount given in the proposal. Does that sound?
Yeah, it's complicated because, again, we haven't sort of formed a recommendation, but we're saying we're giving ourselves the allowance of $200,000 to give us the freedom to perhaps accept this RFP, right?
Yes.
So it just needs to be worded as such, not that we're, using, we basically are using this figure as a guidance for that line item, but it can't be specific to, we're asking for this money to pay this firm because we haven't decided that yet.
Sounds like it'd essentially just be a vote on, so this isn't the actual motion, just making that clear, but a vote on city council to approve a proposed budget allocation of $197,907 for payment for the facilitator group.
I just want to have some clarity on it. So we're saying that what you're recommending is that we just send that number to city council without any breakdown or anything to show them why we believe this is warranted?
Well, we did already in the work session.
Do we break down this 200,000?
Yeah, in full. Gave it to them, told them as well to read it, the entire thing. So gave that responsibility to them as well. And can also send it to them once again, just to make sure. But
Not in the work session, no one had it because it hadn't been updated yet. So.
no, I attached it to them and sent it to them. So they do have that, and also asked them to look at it. And they all did verbally say at that meeting as well, or at least there was a majority of them that said that they are comfortable with that idea of 200,000 allocated to a facilitator group due to everything covered.
And when you say the breakdown, do you mean the breakdown from the RFP from Kearns and West?
Well, I agree with what has been said, that doesn't really make sense, but yes.
Okay.
Because it shows why versus just an arbitrary number of 200,000. So, because there were some council members, two to be exact, that were not very big fans of the number. So I'm just curious.
And just to clarify, that in the city council information packet from last Thursday, the RFP was in that. So the 7 members of the city council have had access to the RFP, which would, I think, provide the breakdown that you're referring to.
Okay, thank you. That's the clarity I was wondering.
As a point of discussion, I'd be interested in hearing others' thoughts on these 3 line items on our submitted budget for this upcoming meeting, which would be keeping line items 1, 2, and 6 and 7. So kind of sticking with all of the discussions that we've had regarding stipends and back pay, and then adding on the facilitator, and then kind of deferring all of the other line items until we have facilitation who can kind of help us decide how best to use the budget, the rest of our budget.
You're saying 1, 2, 6, and 7?
Yeah.
You want to keep 1, 2, 6, and 7?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That would be number 1, commission stipend, number 2, facilitator experts, number 6, back pay for pre-TRC pause commissioners, and number 7, back pay for post-TRC pause commissioners.
For the recommendation to them?
For the recommendation for this,
This is Commissioner Dillard. I'm just going to say I disagree. I would really just love to stick with the facilitator portion and just have that part. And then I really agree that when, if we choose this RFP, that they could really help us convey those items a little bit better than what has been happening at this time.
Yeah, I completely understand your position, but regardless of if it goes together with it or not, I do not have any intention personally of within the budget subcommittee or with the group not still advocating for each of those items. And line of questioning that I personally gave was just to ensure that they seemed aligned with those ideas. And also just, I mean, we can put them in together because they can vote to approve based on each line item. But just to avoid the contention on that aspect, I want to make it as simple of a decision for them as possible. Just double checking these.
Do any of you Zoom panelists have any opinions on amending the budget for council?
I think we should keep it the way it is.
I just want to just give the point again of one thing that the city council did bring up in the last work session was, I don't understand why this keeps being said, but that they feel that it needs to be spelled out more on what is going to be spent on each part of the timeline, this, that, et cetera. But main thing I just wanted to point out as well was that in terms of the full process being put out and conveyed, that still is going to be needed to be done with facilitator and all other budgets I've looked at. That's always the case anyways. it's hard to say what exactly you're going to do before it's done. So that to me was a moot point that didn't make sense. But again, if this is twice now that they keep saying this, even with assumptions being put in there. So it just seems easier to go with what they did verbally agree on to avoid that aspect of essentially them shooting things down. I mean, I just want to reiterate again, I'm not giving up on these items. It's just more of don't want the debate and pushback on each of these items, and then for the vote to just be budget deferred because of these other things, because that's a possibility too. Just because
Maybe I don't understand.
Together, they can defer
Yeah.
all.
Sorry, can you explain then? Sorry. So I thought we were trying to keep them on and then they can vote on line by line, right?
They can do that, but they do also have the choice of deferring the entire thing because they all came in together. So they have multiple ways of playing it. So again,
Okay,
just to
so,
avoid the possibility
mean-
of it being gamed, just put in the one thing.
Yeah, I think we should stick to our plan and just keep pushing. But yeah, we should make them do their job and not just refuse the whole thing because they don't like some of it. I mean, they have common sense. They can pick some items that obviously work and that are, they're agreeing to. So I just think that it's great that we continue to keep that in there. It shows our our tenacity and we're not going to give up on it.
I'm just being very candid here. I don't trust them.
Well, yeah, I mean, after what they did the other day, I get it, for sure.
So my response is that for some of these line items, advertising, outreach, videographers, right, transportation, I think we can have sort of more details available to City Council later once we have a facilitator in place who can help us sort of actually make moves on sort of all of the portions of our mandate, right? The fact finding, the truth telling, and the reconciliation events and processes that we're going to do. So I think that those things can wait until we have a facilitator. The advocacy for us sort of maintaining our position on stipends, I think shouldn't waver. Sort of similar to what you're saying, Commissioner Nobis, right? I think that we've had plenty of discussions about those items and have justified them over and over again. Chair, you have done a good job at defending those items to City Council. So if we present to them an amended budget that's only 4 line items, 3 of which have to do with paying current or past commissioners and 1 dealing with hiring a facilitator, I think that's simple enough for them to get through. And again, they can sort of vote things line by line.
So I'll let Commissioner Daniel go, but then should look to have a motion to vote one way or the other of how we want to do that then.
We can't hear you.
I got another thing after Daniel.
No.
It looks like she's unmuted.
No. Can you click the little arrow next to your
her microphone might be
the right input
disconnected.
device?
No, she is unmuted. I think her microphone just might be disconnected on her own computer.
Plug it back in.
No, your audio input is incorrect.
Well, Daphne's
Commissioner Daniel, when you hover over the little microphone icon, is there a little upwards arrow next to it? Okay, if you click that, are there options for microphone input? And you think that you've selected the right one and it's not working? Okay.
Aw. Can she call in? Is there a way to do that?
Can you use your phone to call in on the Zoom?
not as a panel?
Yeah, I think there is a number. I think it's that 312. I should have it memorized by now, but let me locate that.
I just had a quick thought because I'm tired and I could be looking at this wrong. But for the facilitator part, since it is 9 months and this says through December 31st, should we have something that says that a little bit more specifically?
Yeah, I have that written down to change that part of it.
Okay.
While Daphne is getting that figured out, I'm just going to say, I think where Mohammed and I happen to be coming from is we did have a chat with Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem, and it was really disheartening. It's from what I felt like the conversation from them was they were for sure wanting to get on the change completely. Like the question was verbatim, what would be the most optimal way to do the charges of the TRC? Meaning from what I took is that what is the best way to change the charges of the TRC? And they were kind of not really, they were kind of backpedaling on the facilitator aspect during that meeting. I think that's where our pessimism comes from. To be completely honest, they don't feel like we are all on the same page as council and commission. And I don't think that they will trust or want to invest in a facilitator until they believe that we are on the same page. And that's just from what I felt like from our conversation.
Did they say, can you give us any more information, I guess? Like
It was put towards us in a way of, again, that question of might want to, again, look at the charges of the TRC. So if that makes more sense as to why I asked that specific question to them on what they thought, because they have so much experience with all of these other TRCs.
And it was said before, we even think about a facilitator, we should think about verbatim the most optimal way to address the charges of the TRC.
Which is, again, interesting because on the first budget deferral, the budget deferral was based on you need to first focus on getting a facilitator. So the goalposts keep getting moved.
Can you hear? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So I just wanted to say, I think focusing on the facilitator is the best way, or the best way that we'll end up getting the stipend or anything, because it's not that the city council doesn't understand our position on the stipends, is that we have not presented a good argument. And if you're making an argument, sometimes taking a step back and realizing you need help, you need supporting evidence, is the best way to win all this tech confusion. I hope that makes sense. I just think we focus on one thing now, and then with the help of the facilitator, we can reach the goals that we've set out, including getting that stipend. I yield.
Is there any more discussion on this? Steph, what would be the best way to word this for the minutes? I don't want to.
I think
So-
if kind of just following the
I was just going to say, should I just follow the agenda?
I would just maybe read that, vote on whether to approve the amended budget presented to the city council. And if it, and then you might have to take a few votes, but that's probably or you could be more specific in, Commissioner Rivera could make a motion on including 1, 2, 6, and 7 and do it that way too. So it's just kind of.
It sounds like we have at least 3 people who are set on just wanting to submit a budget with one single line item for for the facilitator. And then there's been some other thoughts thrown out. So, I mean, we can put a motion. I'll make the motion to not recommend the sort of previously amended and submitted budget, but instead submit an updated budget that only has the facilitator line item. Is there a second?
I think you can just make that a motion to submit the budget with just the facilitator item.
Okay. So motion, so moved.
Yeah.
Second.
Any other discussion?
Any further discussion? If not, I'll take roll call. Okay, Commissioner Ali,
Yes.
Commissioner Daniel,
Yes.
Commissioner Dillard,
Yes.
Commissioner Gathawa,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Rivera,
Yes.
Commissioner Nobis,
No.
and then Commissioner Traore.
Yes.
Okay. So the motion passes 7-1.
Motion to,
Nobis in the negative.
are we cool to do a motion to adjourn?
You're adjourned.
Cool. We're all good.
Thank you everyone for your time.